in my father's garage and watch him work on those old tin Lizzys. I built my first automobile, a Model T Ford, when I was 13 years old, out of junk, something like this. We had moved to Herman, California, a suburb of LA, where my father had a wrecking yard. The folks still lived there in Herman. Dad's retired now, of course.
I remember I told Rodger that if he didn't use any complete assemblies from the yard, or anything that was saleable, he could have what he wanted to build that car. It took him only a few weeks. I turned around about twice, and there it was. But it was a good job.
Dad wouldn't let me drive it, though. Said I was too young. So I sold it for $50. All profit, too. I was a millionaire, so I started building another, and another, and another. Mother took a pretty dim view of the whole business.
I would have been a lot happier if Rodger had been as enthusiastic about his schoolwork as he was about building cars.
And later on in life, I would have been a lot better off, believe me. The only things I was good at in high school were machine shop and auto shop and girl chasing. I was very good at girl chasing. Still, I was a big shot in some quarters. In those days, hot rodding was illegal, so we raced at midnight. It was my idea to post sentries. I almost always won those hot rod races. This made me very large with the gang. And a juvenile delinquent with the cops.
Today, Rodger Ward is the majority stockholder and real spark plug behind this supervised and controlled drag race plant, Indianapolis Raceway Park. Here, young men can satisfy their desire for speed and thrills under strict conditions of safety, thanks to former hot rodder Rodger Ward, who is, by the way, now one of the nation's foremost authorities on safe driving.
I'm Chuck Barnes, Rodger's manager. Rodger is probably the most articulate and best informed race driver in the world today on the subject of safe driving. I find this an amazing paradox since he was admittedly a real charger in the early days. Rodger and Brock Yates, a writer, collaborated on this book, Guide to Good Driving. It's a definitive answer for young people on how to stay alive in an automobile. Someday we hope to see it used as a text in every driver education class in every high school in America. The ideas in the book are Rodger's. Not bad for a guy who was a third-year high school dropout, huh?
Yeah, dropping out of school was the stupidest mistake I ever made. And believe me, I've made some buttes. Actually, quitting school made everything just 10 times as hard as it should have been. But even then, I guess I half knew what I wanted to be, for I spent most of my time hanging around the Legion Ascot Speedway in Los Angeles, watching the time trials and trying to sneak into the races. Rex Mays was my first big driving hero. He could win any race he entered if his car held up. Guess that was the first hint I ever had that a race driver was only as good as his car. And I might have tried to get into racing then, except for one thing, Pearl Harbor. I was patriotic, and I was ambitious, and I was still cocky. So I joined the Air Force, and I put in for cadet officer training. About that time, they had lowered the scholastic requirements down to nearly nothing, so I squeaked in.
Rodger Ward ended up as a squadron commander and an instructor in the Air Force. By all the usual rules, he never should have made it. But whatever he does is all out, for good or bad.
And believe me, back in those days, some of it was bad. I was still in the Air Force when I drove my first professional race. A couple of used car dealers had built a quarter-mile dirt track in Wichita Falls, Texas, where they raced midgets. One night, when one of the regular drivers didn't show up, I bullied my way into taking his place. Went about 3 laps, spun out, hit the wall, and split my chin wide open. That was 1946, and I haven't stopped racing since. The Air Force didn't take kindly to an officer and a gentleman being a third-rate racing monkey, so we parted company by mutual agreement, and I went home to California to continue my racing. I drove Ford 60-powered midgets up and down the West Coast, a real rugged life. I raced every night, sometimes twice a day on weekends. I didn't make enough money to eat on sometimes, but I survived somehow, barely, and I was learning. Oh, how I was learning, the hard way. It was the roughest kind of schooling, but you can't beat racing midgets for learning fundamentals. Nothing can touch them for improving your timing and coordination. Back there, right after the war, I began to win some races, got a reputation on the dirt, and at the same time, I began to get another kind of reputation. I didn't really deserve it then, but the word got around that I hit the sauce pretty hard, and I was never seen with the same girl twice. Then, in 1949, that little incident put me in the hospital for a month and out of work for 5. You'd think it would have blasted some sense into my cocky head, wouldn't you? As soon as I could hobble, I was right back at it in the same old way. I mean, back at it in both ways. I think it was right after I won the San Diego Grand Prix in a Ford that Bill Vukovich, one of the all-time greats, said to me, "It's just possible, kid. You may make a race driver someday, if you live." Well, I was living hard and fast and winning a lot of races. I began to figure I was pretty darn good, and I dreamed of finally getting to the big time. The goal of all race drivers, the Indianapolis 500. I pulled every string I could think of to get that big ride, but nobody would touch me with a 10-foot pole.
I'm Duke Nalon, and I guess I'm what you'd call a real veteran at Indianapolis, where I drove my first race here way back in 1938. I guess it was around 47 that we were here at Indianapolis, where we're hearing a lot about Rodger Ward and how he was winning races right and left. We knew all about him, particularly how he seemed to be accident-prone and out of condition, reckless and a lead-footed daredevil, the exact opposite of what an Indianapolis driver should be. But he was winning so many races, he just couldn't be ignored. In 1950, he won more races than any other driver in the United States, including beating an Offenhauser with a Ford-powered midget. The first time that had ever been done. That got him his big chance. He got a ride in the 1951 Indy 500 and a deck manufacturing special.
Another racing official and personal friend of Rodger Ward is Mr. Paul Johnson, steward of the Indianapolis 500.
Yes, I remember Rodger very well. In 1951, he came to Indianapolis in the deck manufacturing car, and I had the privilege of giving him his driver's test that year. Rodger drove the car in the race. He was out on the 34th lap with a broken oil line. It was the beginning of a long succession of spectacular failures. Now, in 1952, Rodger went out on the 130th lap with no oil pressure. 1953, Rodger was relieved twice, first by Andy Linden, then by Duke Dinsmore. And he washed out on the 177th lap with a ring and pinion failure.
At the old Brickyard, I was getting to be known as the No-Luck Joe, except that between Indy races, I was still doing all right, holding up my reputation as a dedicated maniac, and scratching for eating money by driving anything and everything that came my way, even to a stretch as a hell driver, strictly from vaudeville stuff. In the 1954 Indy, I stayed right on form by stalling on the backstretch during the 172nd lap. So far, I hadn't finished even one race. But worse than that, something else was happening to me.
Rodger was a loner in those days, a rugged individualist. He didn't mix with the rest of the race crowd, and he did nothing to knock down the inevitable gossip that was built up by his freewheeling personal life. In fact, around that time, Rodger the Dodger had a hard time getting any kind of a ride at Indianapolis. Nobody wanted to trust him with a $40,000 racing car. Then in 1954 at DuQuoin, Illinois, during a dirt track race, quite unjustly, some people blamed Rodger Ward for contributing to that tragedy. And then, 1 year later, during the Indy 500, an official investigation absolved Rodger of blame for that one. But he was wounded horribly, not physically.
For the first time in my life, I took a long, hard look at the public image of Rodger Ward, and I didn't like what I saw. It was the longest night of my life.
The change didn't come about quickly, nor did it come easily. Rodger gave up the gin mill circuit, he quit smoking, he began a regular program of physical training to put himself in top shape. And most important, perhaps, he forced himself to learn how to live with the world, not against it. He learned how to take advice, how to build and maintain the right kind of relations with those around him. In other words, Rodger Ward became a professional.
Rodger Ward won the 1959 Indianapolis 500 with an average speed of 135.857. He won it again in 1962 at a speed of 140 plus. In 5 consecutive years, he never finished worse than 4th. Today, his house in Indianapolis is literally packed with trophies, understandably so. For Rodger Ward is the all-time point winner and the all-time money winner of American racing. He holds 25 national championship firsts and leads all active drivers today in national point standings. The records he has broken would fill a book. He is the king. A few weeks before the 1964 Indianapolis race, he was given a new honor of a most unusual kind. Membership in the very exclusive Autolite Pacemaker Club, a select organization of those few race drivers who have led the field at Indianapolis for 1 full lap or more. The presentation was made by Mr. Ed Stroh and Mr. Benson Ford.
Rodger Ward has won the Indianapolis race in 1959 and 1962, setting new records each year. He was second in 1960 and 4th last year. Rodger has 4 lap-leading races and a total of 261 leading laps. Rodger, would you please step up here?
Congratulations, Rodger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. It's very beautiful.
Rodger, would you step over and try on our new pacemaker coat?
Sure will, Ed.
It looks like that fits perfectly.
Just exactly the right size.
Just prior to Memorial Day 1964, we interviewed Rodger Ward and asked him a leading question. Mr. Ward,
Yes?
how do you feel about this next big one?
Confident. But then you need confidence, not only in yourself, but in your car and the crew that takes care of it. Actually, we've worked very hard to get this car as near perfect as possible. Out in California, they've been checking all the imponderables on a new $25,000 dynamometer. With this complex dyno, all the exacting requirements of the Indy race can be fed into it, and the engine cycled exactly as it will be during the race. Autolite's world-famous Chicky Hiroshima. He used to be the riding mechanic with my old boyhood idol, Rex Mays. A.J. Watson, my designer and mechanic, who is an authentic genius, even if he does hate to get his hands dirty. Duke Nalon, one of the best racers who ever lived, my longtime friend and critic. And Bob Wilkie, a gentleman, a sportsman, a race car owner, and founder of the Leader Card racing team. And Danny Ames, a great driver and a great mechanical mastermind who rides herd on the Autolite crew. And what a crew. Just the best in the world, if you ask me.
That's a very fine-looking crew you have right there with you now, Rodger.
Yes, isn't it? My wife, Diane, our brand new son, Ricky, and of course, the tyrant of the house, Rascal.
You're a lucky man.
My cup runneth over, you might say.
As usual, you qualified for this 1964 Indy with apparent ease, Rodger. But it has been said that you sometimes find qualifying a bit rugged.
Well, I certainly do. As a matter of fact, I feel that qualifying is far more difficult than the race itself. This year, both A.J. Watson and I are working with a new car that is a great departure for both of us. A magnificent rear-engine car powered by Ford. Up until 1963, we always felt the rear-engine cars were unproved and untested. Now, that's no longer true, and the rear-engine Ford is the finest racing machine there is, in my opinion. Harlan Fingler, the chief steward. You have to get yourself in a frame of mind for qualifying that's quite different from your attitude for the race. When the man says go, you're suddenly all by yourself, strictly alone. It's all up to you. During a race, you're a part of a pack. It's a competition where you can take advantage of the other driver's weaknesses and mistakes. You can use strategy in a race, but during qualifying, you're all alone in a race car going as fast as you can. In spite of one bad lap, I did all right. Even A.J. Watson was pleased, and that's something.
And this year you qualified at 156.4 miles per hour, right?
Right. But man, let me tell you, it sure is lonely out there. Give me the race with lots of company every time.
Perhaps for the record, it should be noted here that in the 1964 qualification runs, the three fastest qualifiers drove cars with Ford engines, all using Autolite spark plugs. All three broke all previous speed records for qualifying runs. Bobby Marshman, in a Ford-powered car with Autolite plugs, drove the fastest practice lap in Indianapolis racing history, 160.084 miles per hour. And in qualifying, all 7 of the Ford-powered racers beat the time of the 1963 pole winner.
Well, it's the big day at last, with all the music, noise, glamour, and glitter that always goes with every Indy 500. Everybody's in a great mood. One thing for sure, we're as ready as we can be, but you have to always bear in mind the fact that a race car is just an assembly of hundreds of separate parts. To get the best car, you pick the best parts, follow the advice of experts, and do a little praying on the side. Still, in the final analysis, the main purpose of automobile racing is to improve the breed, to add to the sum of human knowledge about automobiles and how they can be made better and safer. Well, here we go, the 1964 Indianapolis 500. That's Benson Ford pacing us in the Mustang. We get going nice and easy. I'm in a good slot, outside position in the front row. We're off and running. Here's the first curve. Jimmy Clark is booming out ahead. Well, that's okay. I've got my own strategy. Lay back a little. See how the race shapes up. That's one lap, only 199 to go. Clark's out in front. South curve. I'm rolling smooth. The car really feels great. Northwest turn, coming out. Stopped the race. Dave McDonald is dead. Eddie Sachs is dead. Ronnie Duman is hurt. 7 cars are out. We're all shook up. Real shook up. This is only the second time in history an Indianapolis 500 has been stopped. It has been an hour and 45 minutes since the accident. We're going to have a restart. The show must go on. Only 26 cars are left now out of the original 33. Dave McDonald and Eddie Sachs were friends of mine. I feel terrible. It's the 20th lap. Clark and Marshman are moving away. I'd better do something. Perhaps a leaner mixture would help. It's the 38th lap, and something is wrong. I'm using too much fuel. I turned the mixture control to the down position. That should have given me a leaner mixture, but that made it worse. I goofed. I turned it into the full rich position by mistake, and it's jammed. I can't move it. 41 seconds lost. I'm in real trouble. Locked in full rich, she'll waste fuel at a fantastic rate if she runs at all. The mixture control is being held wide open by a screw head. one of those freak situations. Under these conditions, I'll be lucky to even finish the race. Yet, she's rolling pretty good. This Ford engine is still turning better than 8,000 RPM, even though it's drowning in fuel. By rights, the spark plugs should be fouling. 55th lap, and I have to pull in for fuel. The crew can't believe their eyes and ears that this engine is still running so good in full rich. Lost another 36 seconds, and yet I'm still right up there with the leaders, including Foyt, who hasn't made a stop for fuel. Actually, when I'm on the track, I'm running faster than anyone else. It's the fuel stops that are going to ruin me. How this car can run so good all choked up, I'll never know. 106th lap. More fuel. Both tanks are dry. The crew tells me that in spite of losing all that time in the pits, I'm still in second place. It's a two-man race between Foyt and me. Lost 41 seconds on that third stop. That means I've blown a total of 118 seconds already, in a race where even split seconds count. But she's still running, and only Foyt is ahead of me. 131st lap. I doubt if I can win now, but I'm going to finish as best I can. 143rd lap. Out of fuel again. Into the pits for the 4th time. Lost another big 47 seconds for a total of 165. In racing, that's a lifetime. I can't believe it myself. I'm still in there with my hands tied. Here we go again. More fuel. 188th lap. Only 12 laps to go, and I'm out of fuel again. Another 30 seconds gone. Now I've lost a grand total of 3 minutes and 15 seconds getting fuel. Checkered flag coming up, and A.J. Foyt crosses the line for a new world's record. But still, I'm second, believe it or not. It isn't possible, but it happened. Foyt made only 2 pit stops for fuel, for a total of 1 minute and 21 seconds. I made 5, and lost 3 1/4 minutes. Well, we didn't win that one, but neither did 31 other cars.
In retrospect, Rodger, now that the 1964 race is history, what feelings do you have about it?
Well, naturally, it was a tragic and unhappy day in many ways. But I think it taught important lessons to everyone connected with racing. Lessons that will make future Indy 500s safer and more meaningful. I make no alibis for losing. I pulled a boner. Maybe because I was sort of shook up by that big accident. Actually, the time I lost in those extra 3 pit stops probably cost me the race. But the race proved beyond any question that the engine and the spark plugs could perform magnificently under the very worst of conditions. And as the old Brooklyn Dodgers used to say, there's always next year. See you then, for sure.